On this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds, we're joined by Mark Diaz Truman of Magpie Games and Avatar Legends fame. We discuss your game is not the product. Very insightful. We talk about tabletop role-playing game systems, what makes a good tabletop role-playing game, the difference between buying and owning, and a whole bunch more from an industry veteran. Make sure to get your pen and paper out. There's a lot to cover on this one. Let's get into it.
Game begin.
Let's go.
I used to be a marketer like you until I took an arrow to the knee.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I'm your host, Andrew Lowen, and I'm joined as always by Sean, and we have a special guest today. Mark Diaz Truman, the CEO and co-founder of Magpie Games, joins us. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to have you because you're such an industry veteran, and for everybody that just to kind of frame this podcast episode, you've been crowdfunding since 2011, and you have had a lot of success, and you even have a Kickstarter running right now for Fall of London, which has raised over $700,000 for an RPG. So people listening to this, listen to this man. He knows how to make. He's very successful.
Well, it's funny you said you've had a lot of success, and I almost want to pop in and be like, and a lot of failure. Like this has been it's been 15 years of doing this, for better or worse, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to dig into all of it. And so what we before this podcast, before we started the podcast, we were talking about how we wanted to kind of frame it, and it really just how crowdfunding has changed, how kind of the response of the creator, you being the case study here, has had, how you've had to kind of morph and change because you've had a lot of successes, certainly a lot of bumps in the road. But if you wouldn't mind, we could start with the current project that you have running, and then we could rewind all the way back to 2011 and talk a little bit about that and how it's changed and what's kind of remained the same, and just see what insights we can glean.
I mean, Fallen London as a property it's a great example of how TTRPGs in particular can expand a space, right? So Fallen London is a browser-based game. It's been around since also 2010, it's the 15th anniversary for Fallen London. They have, thousands and thousands of active players who have been involved since 2010. And what you do is you log on, you have adventures in this city called Fallen London, where London was stolen underneath the ground by bats, during Queen Victoria's reign, and it just has never kind of changed. And everything is weird and different. And if you die, you come back, and there's squid people walking the streets and sentient rats, and yet because it's London, everybody's kind of like, well, stiff upper lip, let's get through this. And so everything is kind of normal. And so this is a setting that's already a role-playing game, because you're doing, but it's like a turn-based role-playing game. It's a video game. It has these boundaries around it. And so we started talking with them actually way back in 2019 about doing something. I'm good friends with Chris Gardner, their creative director. I didn't actually know he was the creative director of Phil, but I just met him through an RPG thing. And he was like, "Hey, Mark, do you know what my job is?" I'm like, "I have no idea." Like, "Oh, you have this IP. That's amazing. Sure, let's talk." And they've done a couple of other video games, like Sunless Sea, which is a really popular Steam real video game, not a browser-based game, but game people play on their Xbox kind of game. Also expands that same world. And so when we come in as the TTRPG, it can kind of be tempting to see it as there's a real video game and then a TTRPG, but the commitment level for RPG players, the excitement level, is apparently $700,000+, right? It's a completely different thing. $1 million+ project, maybe, right? That is so different. And so when you think about what does crowdfunding look like? Well, back in the day, we just put shit up and be like, cool, yep, we're trying it, let's go. And now it's every part of this project, from a creator's perspective, is we are very deliberate about everything that we do, trying to reduce, for example, the number of reward tiers down to the smallest number of reward tiers that we can do, so that we don't have to answer questions about what is the difference between, blue plus and blue premium and blue, whatever healthcare kind of plans people sometimes do with Kickstarters, where there's 17 reward tiers that are all marginally different from each other, right? So getting down to the fewest number of reward tiers, making things as clear as possible, front loading the project with as many followers as we can get, all of these things that the average backer will have, it will change their experience, not at all. There's nothing to do with them, right? They just come in back and have a good time. But for us as professionals, there is a long checklist of things that we are doing at every step of the game. And I think Fallen London's a great example. I mean, we had, 10,000 followers before we started. That is not the normal scale for RPG Kickstarters. And you can see that then in the funding, that this is the biggest game on Kickstarter in TTRPGs for this year so far. It's only February, but biggest one so far this year, and probably one of the biggest ones for the year in total. Although I know Alien is probably gonna, they've got 15,000 followers, so they're looking really great for being number one for the year. But Fallen London might be number 2 or 3. That could happen. And I think it really does come from that maturing of the professional space into not a let's throw things and see what sticks to the wall, but a set of principles around how crowdfunding actually works, and then delivering on those principles for backers.
And then also kind of really there's a little bit of a subset of rules, it feels like, within the tabletop space. You've got board games, you've got TTRPG that kind of have their own little subset of rules, and one of them in particular that I've always found challenging, it's one of the main elements of difficulty I find for tabletop RPGs and marketing them, is that they have different systems. And how are you going to convince somebody to go from 5e to I don't know, Pathfinder to 2D20 system or to whatever, right? And you and I had this conversation early on about, is a TTRPG a good game, a mechanically interesting game? And you have real opinions on that, and I'd like to dive into that just a little bit, because I'm really curious about this, Fallen London, and what you how you interpreted it, but then also how you translated that to stuff that backers care about. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's so hard. Yeah. I mean, the first and most important thing is that 5e and D&D in general are not like other products, right? Like you have a bunch of board games behind you, right? So you love board games very clearly. You have a big collection, you're engaged with a lot of different products. There is no equivalent for D&D and board games, right? It would be as if 90% of the people you talk to, 95% of the people you talk to had only played Dominion. Period. You'd be like, have you played Slay the Spire, which is also a deck building game? I mean, it's a video game too, but have you played, I don't know, Clank? And they're like, what's Clank? No, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of that in my life. Right. And that feeling of just hegemony is the only word that I can think of. It is a product that warps everything around it for the worse. Right now, whether D&D is a good game, it's not. It's a different question, right? but what it does is it literally just makes it impossible to do anything else. So I have a good friend in Tucson he jokes he's the best GM in Tucson. That's the kind of person he is, this jokester kind of guy. His name is Jason Corley, and he's been on the internet since 1985 in RPG spaces, well known fool, jokester, speaking truth to power guy. And he is very famous for saying, statistically, we're all playing D&D. There's no not D&D audience, right? There's just D&D plus rounding errors. And so when I think about the professionalization of the TTRPG space, one of the biggest tragedies, and I don't use that word lightly, of that professionalization is in 2023, 7 out of the 10 most funded projects were 5e. It's like finding out that 7 out of the best restaurants last year were McDonald's. McDonald's number 27, McDonald's number 42, best reviewed in the city. And you're this cannot be what TTRPGs are about. But when you talk about systems and culture, what happens is that D&D is a very effective product, because if you want to play role-playing games and you go to a store and you say, I'd like to try an RPG, there will be someone there who knows how to play 5e, and they will teach it to you, and you will play it, and it will be fun for some degree of fun. And that is a really difficult thing to escape.
Yeah, it's there's I just got Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era in, and it was crazy because I took a very large game off my shelf, the Isofarian Guard, or I mean, it was on my table, and we packed that away, and it took an hour. And then I took Elder Scrolls out, which is a very large box as well. And I thought, okay, I really want to play this, but man, there is such a hurdle in the rule book. It is 94 pages or whatever, it's almost 100 pages. but there was this little
You mean it's
slip of paper.
it's 1/3 of a TTRPG?
Yeah. So my mind was exploded. I'm like,
Yeah, of
well,
course. Yeah.
this might be too much. But no, I open it up, and then there was this little slip of paper that said, "Do you hate reading rules? Use the
Yeah.
interactive Diaz tutorial." And there was this, I don't know, Diaz is like an app that will teach you how to play without even using the rule book. It's like, okay, get these components, then these components. You want
Yep.
to play the tutorial, and that kind of thing. So we learned completely digitally, and it was a mind-blowing experience that we could actually start this massive box after opening, unwrapping the plastic. We could just start playing within about 30 minutes. We were actually playing the game and setting up our characters and all that.
Yeah.
And that was like a major hurdle that was overcome with this tutorial system. And I would imagine that when you understand how to play 5e already, then any other 5e supplement is like, oh, I can just jump right into this and understand. And the barrier is, as you said, 300 pages for the average rule book, right?
It's so much worse than you just described. Like in 2 or 3 ways. Like the first one is TTRPGs are not no one comes to TTRPGs as a group. Like nobody sits down as a group of 5 people and says, I have a stack of TTRPGs. Do you guys want to decide as a group which one of these stacks that we play that I just happen to have here at the table? Right? What happens is that someone at the table has to guide that conversation. And it's usually the GM who is saying, these are the things I am willing to run because I understand how to run them. Right?
Yeah.
So the board game is its own program. It runs. You do the things the board game wants you to do and it runs. There's some exceptions, right? But that's mostly how it works. Even if you're playing something like Fury of Dracula, right? Like 4 people are playing not Dracula and one person is playing Dracula, but the rules for Dracula are not sometimes fuck the players' heads. That's not like one of the rules of Dracula. The rules of Dracula aren't about doing things outside the game rules. Does that make sense? Like they're all contained. If all you do is do what the rulebook tells you to do, you will have a satisfying game of Fury of Dracula. But if you're a GM and you're playing Dracula, you have to be thinking, how do I mess with them? Like, how do I make Dracula feel real? And that's not going to be in the rules necessarily.
You go to Symphony of the Night and you start quoting things, what is a man?
Absolutely. 100%. You steal, you borrow, you come up with stuff in the moment, right? No question at all, right?
Yeah.
But then the second side of that is the other really hegemonic like sin of D&D is that it's terrible to learn. It's a terrible game to learn. It convinces you that RPGs take hours to learn. They do not. That is just not true. It's true for D&D. It's not true for virtually almost every other role-playing game. It does not take hours to learn. So you have this thing where it's like if you've only seen Boss Baby 2, then you think all movies sound like Boss Baby 2. And it's like my entire career has been at some level being like, you could just watch Paddington. It doesn't even have to be not a kid's movie. You could watch something else, right? And so like there is a tragedy, I think, that Kickstarter in its professionalism, one of the problems is that things have gotten much more flat. There's fewer weird projects. There's fewer things where people swing for the fences. There's fewer interesting, weird experiments. And there's a lot more of the same thing over and over and over because those things work. And then one day they don't, right? Like the Marvel universe, like, Endgame hits $2 billion. And you're like, can Marvel make a bad movie? I've never seen it. And then 10 bad movies in a row, right?
Yeah.
And so like I think that we're going to see that in this next couple of years is that people are going to realize that a game that promises to be Studio Ghibli with a 5e engine makes no sense. Like, how would that possibly work?
Yeah.
That is not a satisfying experience. Like, it doesn't do the thing you want it to do. And so what happens is that you eventually, I think, have to reconcile yourself with the fact that the system that you're playing in matters. Your GM matters. Their interests matter. The players at the table matter. But if the system is telling you that you can only do these things, then that's what your game's going to be about, right? And so how do we develop games that have a broader spectrum of experiences? And Magpie has tried that in some very bold ways. Like I have back here a poster for my game Cartel, which is a Mexican narco fiction game in the vein of Breaking Bad or Narcos or even The Sopranos. And I think when I talk with people about it, they literally don't understand how the game could possibly work, right? They're like, my framework is killing goblins. How would I play Tony Soprano? Right? It's too far for them to go. But we are developing for Fallen London. This is our first example of the Adana system, which is our new system that is trying to create a space that's intuitive and easy to pick up, but that has a lot of ways for us to customize it to that particular setting or rules set or whatever's going on with it. And that is, we have not made our own system before. We use Powered by the Apocalypse, which is kind of an open source system a lot, where every iteration of the game is like a new thing from the ground up.
Yeah.
Right. But Adana is going to be our system like 2D20 or Year Zero engine and Magpie. This is 15 years of experience going into this engine that we have made that I'm really excited about. And a lot of what we're going to do in the future is going to be based in that same engine, because I think we recognize that asking people to learn a new game every time, even if I can say it's not hard, they believe it's hard. They believe it's a challenge. And it is a challenge to get a new group together, to master a new set of rules, to do new things, because it's just hard. RPGs are hard, right?
Yeah.
They're not like board games.
So when you're talking about marketing as an RPG company, you really kind of have two targets. The first one, really a big one, are the GMs, right? Like that's who you're really talking to. So like you're not necessarily talking to players of RPGs, although you're gonna have people probably that are like, oh, the GM in my group is gonna love this. So I bought the thing, and then I'm begging the GM, hey, please play this with us on Thursday. Please learn this. So I find that is one major target. But then there's also, at a greater level, you have sort of from a company perspective, like Wizards of the Coast with D&D 5e or D&D 1 now, 6th edition or whatever.
Sure.
You have
Don't call it 6th edition. Right.
So you have this player base that is used to playing the thing, and that whatever that edition is. And I think that it's really smart. First of all, just a commentary. When you develop your own system, you have a group of kind of players that understand the system, that are going to be much more open to just getting something else within the world of that system. So you're kind of building your own audience. I think it's super smart as a company. It's almost like for me as I was talking to the guys over at Kinson Key Games. They did Galactic Cruise, and they're doing this game that's like I want to say some sort of like Native American theme, for their next one. Very different than like the Wall-E type, take a cruise in space sort of thing. But both of them are heavy crunch Euro games. And that is the thread that kind of unifies all their audience. Why would you buy a game in, where you go on a cruise to space, and then a game where you're, Native Americans growing like some crops or something? And that's the unifying thread. And so for a company, the game system is the unifying thread. And then I think there are other minor things that really help, but it feels like in RPGs, the theme is normally, like with a board game, the theme is like a third of the story. It's super duper impactful.
Sure.
But then with the RPG, it's almost like there's this wall of glass in between the player and the theme, and that wall of glass is the system. It's almost like if a game, like a board game, is not funded or funded, then I'm going as a board game purchaser of on crowdfunding. I'm going to look and say, well, is this real yet? Should I take this seriously if it's not yet funded, versus a game that's funded, unlocked 10 stretch goals or whatever? And be like, okay, well, this one's a winner, so I can actually dig in and learn about the theme and learn about this and that. And it seems like that's a tough barrier to overcome in RPGs. But there was this like a gift that Wizards of the Coast gave everyone, which was the revocation of the open gaming license. That just seemed like it was God's gift to every other non 5e company. Sure. Would you mind speaking to that a little bit? How that impacted you as a company?
I just think it's important to remember that the OGL was always a way of trying to control the RPG industry.
Yeah.
It was 100% always part of Wizards of the Coast plan to reduce the number of competitors and centralize play. Mm-hmm. Like this is not like a conspiracy really theory. Like, yeah. But like, you can go read Ryan Dancy's posts. Like, he was there in the room. That was the explicit strategy that was decided. Mm-hmm. So like, the irony of this is that the OGL did exactly what it was supposed to do, which was to say to people, rather than develop your own ideas and your own system and do anything innovative, why don't you just come into our garden and make things for us? and you'll have a willing player base, and we'll make a deal here. You stop trying to live outside 5e or live outside D&D, and we will permit you to make money for us.
Yeah.
And then Wizards stupidly was like, well, I don't know, we're not making enough money. Look at this Critical Role thing, right?
It's like Narcos renegotiating rates or whatever.
Oh my God, like don't screw it up when it's all working, guys. But the nice thing is it has, I think, revealed a little bit how hegemonic it is. Like that there are so many people doing interesting things that if they broke them away from 5e, right, if they did them on their own in their own way, they're going to have more interesting results. But I think at the end of the day, we struggle a little bit, I think, as Magpie, because there's concentric circles of people that are kind of interested in RPGs, right? Like the smallest one are the people that are like, they don't want to see my mainstream 8.5 by 11 book. They want a zine printed at Kinko's that has like a salad dressing vinaigrette resolution system. And I am and have been one of those people, so there's no judgments. Those people don't care about what I do anymore. They at one point they did, and then I sold out.
Like you went mainstream.
I made game with dice. Like, what am I doing? Right? Like, and like more power to them, right? That's great. And then there's like another tier of people that I think is more me, that says, I want my game to do something. I have the same attitude about board games and RPGs. If I sit down at the table, I want this experience, the thing that I am promised, to be made real by the game.
Yeah.
Right. And most RPGs do not live up to that standard because the GM is supposed to do it. The GM is the one who works the magic. And a lot of Magpie's products have appealed to people in that circle for a very long time because our attitude is that we want to give you, the GM, the most number of tools to do that thing and to have the system carry as much of that burden as it can possibly carry. So if you're playing Urban Shadows, which is our game that's coming out in March, like you have playbooks. One of those playbooks is like, say, the Sworn, who's like they're a person sworn to serve a powerful faction of wizards or something, and we say, okay, Sworn, you get a legendary weapon. You have Mjolnir or like Excalibur or something cool like that. Pick some options off the list, and that player is like, oh man, that I didn't have to think of that. That's awesome, but I still get to pick whatever I want, right? But like that tension, that way of saying, we're going to give you these tools, but you have to finish them. That has been very effective. But the next level out of people, they don't even want that. They want something, they want a much more accessible in their mind experience that doesn't tell them what to do or where to go, that they can just do whatever they want, quote unquote. And that ends up being really challenging because if you're doing whatever you want, how does that actually sync up with the game? Right.
Yeah.
Nobody sits down and says, I want to play Wingspan, but instead of birds, I want it to be cars. And I want all these rules to be different. Let's play. And you're like, that's not Wingspan then, right? But that's board gamers, I think, come to Carspan, Finspan, right? Like whatever. Like the goal here would be for, in my mind, over the next 20, 50 years, for RPG players to develop the sophistication that board game players have of at least being willing to meet the game where it is.
Yeah.
Like, and you see that, I think, Free League is real good friends with us. We love them and we love their games because they're doing the same thing. Like, you sit down to play Alien, you are meeting the system halfway, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of companies that have returned to that middle tier, which kind of evaporated after the crash in the early 2000s. There are not a lot of companies that survive that are our size. But like, as it has redeveloped, that middle tier is, I think, where a lot of that great work can happen, where you're saying, here is a system that's very accessible, but it still kind of challenges you, but it's not so specific, Cartel, that you're like, I don't want to engage it, but it's also not so open that you aren't being challenged a little bit to do something. And that kind of finding that balance is where we are looking to develop some new tools, right? And have those tools be proprietary tools to us. Like, we get to use them as much as we want and not have to kind of contend with who else is using them and how are they using them. And that gets very murky from a marketing perspective. If I've had people come up to me and say, I don't play PBTA games because I played these 3 games by other companies that were developed with 1/10 the resources and experience of your game. So I'm not playing your games because these 3 games were bad in my experience. And I'm like, well, I can't fix that. Like, I can't, like, that's not something I can do. Right. So like, we want to have a space that's ours that we can very much say, this is a consistent experience from game to game to game to game and see what happens. Right. And again, Free League, Modifius, even like Chaosium, right? Like
Mhm.
these people have done this for a long time, and it's a good model.
Yeah.
So
Now,
Mark, I got a
go
question
ahead.
because one thing that might interest you is we reviewed some of the see if any commonalities in some of the failed Kickstarter projects that we've marketed, and what was some of those, and a lot of them were to do because they were either party games or like games for children specifically, and the other category was tabletop role-playing games. Those seem to have a higher failure rate than any other game type that we've marketed. And I think a huge proponent for kind of convincing people of your kind of obscure tabletop role-playing game is it has to have good art, and it has to be a world in which people are wanting to be in and spend lots of time in. Would you agree with that sort of
Oh my God,
synopsis?
yes. I mean, it is so frustrating and now obvious to me that there's a sense, like the word people use a lot is escapism, and I think
Yeah.
that's wrong. I don't think it's escapism. Like I don't think people play tabletop RPGs just to escape. Meaning like they don't need to be. It doesn't always need to be a power fantasy. It doesn't always need to be. You don't always need to be the good guys. I think there are a lot of people who that's like their default mode of play. But like I think that doesn't have to be. Yeah, but let me tell you, they don't like being the villains in a serious real world way. And the irony of
Mhm.
Cartel is that you're not playing villains, you're playing people.
Mhm.
Nobody in Narcos is a villain without any sort of gray area. That's what narco fiction's about. But when you show up to people and you're like, "Hey, do you want to play an elf or do you want to play a Mexican drug lord?" They're like, elf, right?"
Yeah.
And like the one product that I think really set of products that surprises me on this is actually zombie games. Zombie
Mhm.
games almost always underperform. If you go look at a zombie game, and I think it's very simple. Like the question of why it happens that way and why it works that way is very simple. It's when you think about playing a game that you're excited about, then do you want to be in like a fantastic world with wizards and dragons and stuff, or do you want to be scrounging for like cans of dog food in a grocery store that's overrun by zombies? That's an
Yeah.
easy pick, right? And so, Sean, when you talk about like having great art that gets across the setting because people do buy on theme, having very, very clear settings that feel exciting and engaging to people, and then finally having a world that people want to spend more time in.
Mhm.
Like it's not even that it has to escape, it's that they have to want to be in that world. That
Mhm.
is the key, right? And
Mhm.
that's I think a thing a lot of TTRPG creators don't want to reconcile themselves with that part. And I put myself in there too. Like it took me a long time to get to the point where I was asking myself, are players going to want to spend time in this world? Or am I just doing a thing and hoping they want to spend time in the world,
Yeah.
even when all the evidence says they don't?
That's a really tough thing. There's also one other element that I think is probably more prevalent in RPGs than people want to give it credit for. And I learned this lesson way back when I started my business. And I think I started in 2009. I was selling websites, and um, I learned that 9 out of 10 people, they can't envision a finished product. So like when I'm like, oh, I'm going to make you a website that looks like this, that, or the other. The only way to get most people to be able to see the product is to say, here is an example of a website that currently exists. We are going to take this slider from the website. And they're like, oh, okay, I'll have that slider. And you kind of make it a little bit, you demonstrate a little bit to them, give them something physical to look at. And that kind of started me on this thread of like people generally, for the most part, there are, like I said, 10% of the population totally can see a
Yeah.
finished product.
Hmm.
But then you've got like 90% of the people think they can but can't. And so when I am when those people, to kind of use your examples that you gave, they're like, I want to be the character that I want to play, I want to have open world options and that kind of thing. And all they're going to do, and this, it just seems like RPGs players do this. The GM spends like 8 hours on a quest line and everything, and the RPG players, the guy's like, all right, you start in a tavern. There's a wizard, and he has some things floating around him, and he looks like he has a quest. Everyone's like, let's go outside and ignore the wizard, and it's like, but I spent 8 hours on this quest line, and those are players. And I find that players are actually sometimes, I'll say this in a very brazen, bold way, just to simply make the point. They're not actually very creative at all, and it kind of takes a creative product to make uncreative people into creative people. It's like McDonald's. The genius of McDonald's is the system that takes an ordinary person
Sure.
and gets extraordinary results out of them because make like they taught Donald Trump
Yeah.
to make fries in about 8 minutes or whatever.
Yep,
It's like,
great.
okay, well, anybody can make fries with the system and get the same exact results. So the system is very important to turn players into people who feel powerful, who feel epic, who feel like they have all this freedom. One of the companies that I think does a really great job with this is Elon Lee with Exploding Kittens and Poetry for Neanderthals and games like that. They turn ordinary people into really funny people. Or games like Cards Against Humanity and all the other clones. They take ordinary people and make them funny. And that's, I think, what causes it just like my mom is not a funny person, but she becomes really funny when you hit her over the head with a giant inflatable Neanderthal bat or whatever. And
Yeah.
and other things like that. And I think really great RPG systems, I think what you're kind of getting at in a more intelligent way than I am is they turn like ordinary people into like really expressive, creative people like in the middle of the game. And when I play RPGs, I find it difficult to like truly put my, I'm still Andrew playing at a table
Yeah.
trying to role play, but like I sit, it's hard to just take my shoes off, put my shoes in the feet of like whatever elf slippers, and now I'm this high elf warden or whatever.
Right.
It's hard to be like to act like that at the table.
Yeah, well, the thing you're pointing to, I think, is that role playing games are fundamentally a creative act in every moment, right? Like there's a lot of playing board games, and I love playing board games. Like I have a huge board game collection. I love board games. They they don't require you to be creative at every step of the process. It is okay to sometimes just say, I move my piece here and roll a die, and then you're done, right? That was the move I made. Yay, right? And then sometimes you're going to be like, I do this really interesting creative strategy, or I make this choice, or I do this thing. But you're not obligated kind of in every moment to embody a character, to figure out where this character is going. There's a lot of layers going on in an RPG. It's not surprising that it's a lot more tiring and a lot more work to play an RPG than play Azul, right? Like Azul is like, I move my tiles, do the thing. Great, this was fun, right?
Yep.
But I think that there's since we're on a marketing podcast, let's be honest. It's not about whether the game does make you feel smart or does make you feel those things, or whether it does those things in reality. It's about whether it makes you feel like you've done those things.
Yep.
So there is a really wonderful. I will go so far to say it is a satire of Cards Against Humanity, called Adult Party Game, which was put forward by, I think it was Dragon Quest. Is that the name of the guy? I forget. Like yeah, Dragon Quest. It's basically what he did was he did a Kickstarter. He's this person who does reviews for board games where he'll be like, here's Battleship, and Battleship is a game about a sailor selling popsicles. These white popsicles and red popsicles, like little pieces that go in the board. And he'll explain all the rules of this game that doesn't exist, right? Like it's all made up, right? And he did this amazing Kickstarter that nobody backed because it was too weird, called Offensive Adult Party Game. An Offensive Adult Party Game basically consists of 6 cards. And basically each card says that that like I like this game because it gives me the illusion that I'm funny.
Yeah.
Right? Like that, like I get to put 2 offensive ideas together and therefore I am funny. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great satire. I mean, people have lots of fun with Cards Against Humanity. Whatever, cool. You're having a good time. But what's important about Cards Against Humanity, I think, from a marketing perspective, is it doesn't matter if you're actually funny.
Yep.
It matters that you feel like you're funny.
Yep.
And I think that is a really hard thing to grapple with in RPGs, in that like the feelings about the game do not come explicitly from the system. Right. They also come from, well, who is your GM?
Yep.
Who are your other players? Did you have a good environment to play this game? Or are you playing it in like a giant hall with 50 other tables going? Yep. Right? Yeah. Like there's so many elements of playing an RPG that will disrupt that feeling and will remain completely invisible to the player. Right? They don't even understand what happened. And we have a very, like you said, gamers have some bad habits. One of the big ones is trying to fix a thing that ain't broke. So
Yeah.
there'll be people who are like, well, I played Cartel, but I don't feel comfortable playing Mexicans. And I'm like, as a Mexican, I have some questions, but like I don't feel comfortable playing Mexicans. So I just set it in Ireland. And I'm like, but like the game is built for fine, like cool, I get like, and
Yeah.
it's like, well, before I even drove this car, I ripped out the engine and put it in a new engine, and I don't like this car. Or what's the joke with recipes? I substituted all, like, I made this recipe, but I didn't use any of the ingredients you said, and it was bad, right? Like that sense of like,
Yeah.
the recipe blogs, right, where the
Yeah.
comments is just this horror show of people
The
trying to
lady
fix a
that
thing.
made the Marie Callender's pie. You remember
Yeah,
that? It's like,
yeah.
thanks, Marie Callender's, and it was like a burned pie, and she
Yeah.
put it in for like 3 hours or something.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So you have this experience, I think, with RPGs across the board where, when you think about marketing, right, I think people often wonder, how does Magpie repeatedly generate products that people are excited about before they've played them, right? And I
Mhm.
think it goes to the sense of you have to create both the reality that that game is doing those things
Mhm.
and give the impression that they're doing those things.
Yeah.
And that is why Kickstarters are so freaking hard. Is
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you're doing product development plus license management plus marketing plus creating the sense of what the RPG is. And
Yep.
that whole experience of connecting with players is really powerful, but it
Yeah.
also means that like you are playing without a net. There's no net. If you put up a project and it does not hit those marks, you're done. Like
Right.
there's no way to recover.
It's really a difficult it kind of forces the program. I call it the programmer brain and the creative brain. So the programmer brain would just say like, okay, I have a project, I need to complete it, and then we'll think about the marketing. We'll just sell it after that. And sometimes you see
Yeah.
people that make a game, print 1,000 units, and they're like, okay, now I need to sell it. It's like, well, you forgot, you should have done some infrastructure work before that, right? But then crowdfunding, you can't just make the product. You have to also, in addition to gathering the audience and that kind of thing, the creative brain is all about demonstrating the product. We actually talked about this in last week's podcast where we talk about how to effectively demonstrate that the product is what it says it is. What words can I use? What images can I pair with the words? How, what elements are really important to tell people and explain, and what,
It's really challenging.
it is, and for you, all the things there are to know almost, compared to me about RPGs and everything, and especially about the products that you make as the creator of the products. It's like, what do I say about this product? Because I know everything there possibly is. So how do I, what I always say is, how can you explain your product in 6 words or less? It's like what's unique, what's the hook, and whatever. You've got 6 words. It's like, oh my goodness, how do I
Well,
pare that down?
one of the big things with board games is if you're going to Kickstarter for the board game, you almost certainly need to have it done, like done, like every component done, download the rule book done, because that's what
Yeah.
board gamers expect. And part of that is because if you have all those components done, I, a layperson, can log in and see them and understand them and be like, good, cool, yes, you do look like you know what you're doing. I have some questions, but like overall it looks pretty good. But for the RPG, the final product's a 300-page book. So like
Yeah.
even if you did have it done, I'm not reading it before I
Yep.
back your project. That's insane. So instead with the RPG, you have this sense of like, does it feel like this is worth my time? And I do think one of the big challenges of understanding crowdfunding, sales in general for RPGs is that, and board games too, I think, is most of the people who are buying these products, the money is not the issue. There's a very, I would say on average, a fairly high income group. Either because they're older people like me who are like have stable jobs and that this is the hobby I have and I do this instead of playing golf or something. So it's a reasonable hobby to blow a couple $1,000s a year on or whatever. Or you're 20, you have no bills at all, and you buy RPG books, and like that's your one thing, that or black tar heroin, right? Like you're like, I'm going to do this, right? And so what we find though is that people don't buy because they're like, I'm never going to get it to my table.
Yeah.
I'm never gonna play this. So we have a bunch of collectors who will buy almost anything because you can't see it from your giant wall of RPG books over here.
Yeah.
I haven't played all these books. I've played all these games. Like I'll be honest with you, right? But I want them. I want them to be in my collection. I want to be able to read them and reference them and have this be a part of this community of this art form and this folk art, right? But if there's something I think that is not ever going to get to my table, I'm never going to read it, I'm never going to invest the time in it, then I'm not going to do it. And
Yep.
licenses help to cut through that. So like,
Yeah.
if you're a fan of Alien, you're paying attention to the Alien product, but they also then limit it. So
Yeah.
we talked a little about talking about the past, and we're running a little short on time. But when we did our very first projects in 2011, Marissa and I put up like a little Shakespearean game where you played actors who were in a Shakespearean play, and the GM was the director, and you could basically tell the director, I, Ophelia, the person playing Ophelia, think it's stupid that I die, so I think you should change Hamlet's script and let me still live, and then I will be a part of the story moving forward. And if you succeed on your role, the director changes the script, right?
Mhm.
And so it was a cute little game, and we put it up, and we raised $5,000 for it, which was at the time felt like winning the lottery. Like, who get $5,000 to make an RPG? That's incredible. And none of our friends and family backed it, which Marissa was really upset about. And I was like, no, no, no. I was in a bunch of bands in college, and I'll tell you, getting people to your first show is really easy, but then no one comes to your second because they were just there to pity you. So if
Yeah.
nobody pitied us and we still got enough money to do this, then that means there is an audience. Like, there is an actual audience of people that want this thing. And it's a little 6x9 black and white book, and all it's doing is having basically one good idea. Like,
Mhm.
you guys want this? It's one good idea. It's $20, right? And then fast forward to us leading the 7th Sea second edition campaign,
Yep.
which was the first RPG campaign to do $1 million. And that was, here is I joked, an infinity stone of the RPG industry, like one of the original licenses in 7th Sea.
Mhm.
And you go to people who play 7th Sea, like, would you like a new 7th Sea? And they're like, yes, I would like that. And that's like such a radically different conversation, right? There's no way for me to ever get my little Shakespearean game to $1 million, because how would I sell, 50,000 people on the idea that they want to have this one little cool idea in a black and white book?
Mhm.
But we can sell 10,000 people on dropping $100 on average to get a game that has already been a part of their heart.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we had a message from a guy who was like, hey, I'm backing your campaign. I'm sorry I can't back it for more. He backed it for like $300. I'm sorry I can't back it for more. This story, like, this seriously, like, upset me. This was how intense the story was. He was like, I was homeless for 3 years. And when I was homeless, the only possessions I had were basically like a few living things and my 3 7th Sea books. And I would go to the library every week, and I would run 7th Sea for people at the library while I was homeless. And that's kind of what kept me alive. So here's my $300.
That's amazing.
And it's like, how do you possibly inspire that in people?
Mhm.
You can't. It's impossible. There's nothing I
Yeah.
can do. I can't put forward a game that makes you feel that level of emotion that you've never
Right.
played before.
Yeah.
Right. So when people are looking at licenses, the reason licenses are just so big and so important in RPGs is because people have this really deep relationship with it, right? So when
Mhm.
we did Avatar, we knew it was going to be big. Like, we just knew, right? It was going to be big. We put up a email subscription for people to download the quick start, and we like had 50,000 people sign up in like the first 2 weeks.
Wow.
It's just bonkers numbers, right? They were so bonkers that we couldn't do the math. Like, I was like, I don't even know what this means, right? So first day we raised $1 million. We had told Viacom, we think we can do $1 million. And then we did it on the first day. And we're
Yeah.
like, okay, well, the second day will be like 200,000. So everybody, like, cool your jets. And then the second day was $1 million. And we're just like, uh-oh, like, that's a problem. Like, and like, there's many things. If I go back in time, I would be like, Mark, do these in waves, or do it this way, or limit that thing, or whatever. But like, at some fundamental level, it was just, we had hit a group of people whose
Mhm.
connection to this thing was really, really high, who had a really good sense that this was going to fulfill some dream of theirs to make a bender. Like, what's your bender? Like, create your character, right?
Mhm.
And the license itself had not had any new development since
Yeah.
Korra, right? I mean, there was comic books and stuff, but those are
Mhm.
kind of outside of what most people know, right?
Right.
So like, we just hit at like, there's no way I could repeat it. Like, people ask me all the time, how did you do Avatar? And I'm like, okay, well, first thing, you just need to find a license that is beloved by millions, that has not had enough development. So just do that first, and then when
Yeah.
when you've got that, you come back and talk to me, and I'll tell you how to make $10 million, right? But like, the problem with crowdfunding is there's no A/B testing.
Yep.
I can't figure out exactly how much people are willing to pay, or how many people there will be, and
Mhm.
Avatar is a great example of how that goes wrong, because by the time the project was done, we now have 85,000 backers. Managing 85,000 people is extremely difficult,
Yeah.
right? And there were many times, dark nights of the soul, where I was laying on the floor of our warehouse, frustrated that one more thing had broken, and I had to keep telling myself, it's not that I've never done this before. No one has ever done this before.
Yeah.
There's no, D&D doesn't ship out 100,000 copies directly to players. right? When D&D comes, a new version of D&D comes out, right? So
Yeah.
like when I think about like what does it mean to do crowdfunding, right? It is kind of throwing yourselves to the wolves. Even if you think you have a lot of power, even if you think you've organized everything really well, it is at some level you put up your project and you see where things go, right?
Yeah.
And for every project I predicted correctly, like for Urban Shadows, which was in 2020, we did a really good job of. I was like, I think we're gonna do about $200,000, and we got like $198,000, right? It's like
Mhm.
exactly what I thought, right? For every one of those, there are 5 where I am radically off, like
Yeah.
by an order of magnitude off, right? And I think even as the space professionalizes, I think there are real the reason that we see fewer and fewer people doing RPG Kickstarters at scale. There's always going to be a
Mhm.
bunch of new creators, but there's the reason I talked about that flattening is
Mhm.
like if you're going to take that level of risk, why would you not make it 5e?
Yeah. Right.
Like it actually is really you have to be really brave to say. I mean, I'll be just frank. Like we really believe in our new engine. We think it's an incredible engine. We think it's going to do a lot of great things. But the day before launch, like I absolutely had a moment where I was like, what are we doing? Like no one knows this. What are we doing? This is such a huge risk for our company. And realizing, well, it's also the only way forward.
Yeah.
We have to
Yeah.
do it at some point. We have to do this at some point. And so like crowdfunding is really just like product development on steroids,
Yeah.
right? Doing it at this scale in front of this giant audience, trying to figure out what they want, trying to figure out what you need to do as a creative, and hoping that you're still enough of a creative that this isn't just shuffling tchotchkes to
Mhm.
people who will pay for it, to that you're actually doing something meaningful so that at the end you have something that you're proud of, that you
Right.
can take and sell in the future and build your business around.
Yeah, and what I love about something that you're doing with this new system and with Fallen London is, and I think a lot of people kind of skip over this and don't really kind of realize the importance of it. They think I need to fund my Kickstarter, and if it gets funded and I make several $100,000, I'm going to be super happy, and that's the dream realized. But then when you finish the Kickstarter, I had this kind of this realization during my first Kickstarter. We raised $300,000, and by the time we delivered, it was about $500,000 that we had raised in
Mhm.
pre-orders and all that. And I realized the key is actually getting people when they receive the box to be excited that they received it enough to actually open it and play it. Because if they open it and play it, that's how the game has lasting power. It's like if I, a lot of people are like, oh, who knows about this new property? I don't have any connection to it. Just like everybody else making a new thing. But now when the game is released and people do play it, they now have a connection. So when the expansion or when some other related property comes out, it now you have
Yeah,
built momentum. And the problem I
yeah,
think is when people make a thing and they're like, all right, I sold it. Phew, duh, job done. Your job's actually only half done
yeah,
because you have to, when people receive the box, they have to be excited enough to open it. I remember Isaac Childers did Gloomhaven, and that was very successful. Then he created this game called Founders of Gloomhaven, which was like a Euro kind of tile laying game, and it was like totally immersion breaking for a lot of Gloomhaven players that just instant backed it and received it. A lot of people heard about one bad review and they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to open the box, and they just let the box that they paid for sit on their shelf because somebody demotivated them or made them sad or made them think that they wouldn't like it or whatever, and so they never opened the box. And I see this many times where people they don't kind of have that long-term vision. Can you speak to that a little bit
yeah.
more, like?
It's such a great question. Like I really hope your listeners understand that like very rarely do I get to have like next level conversation about crowdfunding. Like lots of times people are just like, how do you do crowdfunding? I'm like, okay, well, this is a 101 video on crowdfunding, but like this is the real question, right? Which is like, I haven't come up with a cheeky name for it, but like there is for me like a really important date in any product life cycle, which
Oh,
is the day that you have sold as much outside the Kickstarter as you have sold inside the Kickstarter,
mhm,
right? So I only have a few products that's ever been true for, right? So like Cartel, we're not even close. Like not even it will never happen. Like I think I could sell my entire stock of Cartel that I have, and I will never get close to getting as much money after the Kickstarter I did during Kickstarter. And at some level, like
mhm,
that's fine. Like it's a weird game that the people who are into that found me on Kickstarter and funded that game. So we're good.
mhm.
Like thanks guys. Like that was what the mission accomplished, right? Like that's what we're supposed to do. Root did it within a year. right? Like within a year, right? We had sold as much outside the Kickstarter as we did during the Kickstarter, right? And that's because people were engaged with it. Now the question is, why are people engaged with it? I actually disagree with you. I don't think it has much to do with reviews. Board games, of course, are a little different than RPGs. RPG reviews basically don't exist. Like
Yeah.
people, when they do an RPG
Like
review,
spoilers almost.
they tell you what's in the book, but they don't play it. So how would they review it? And they certainly don't play it for 5 sessions, which is what you would actually need to do to review it. And all of us who do know stuff about RPGs don't write about each other's games because that seems like not appropriate. So I will go and run a game and I will have many thoughts on it and I will share none of them because why would I do that to that creator or to the discourse in general? It's not helpful, right? So when we see something like Quinn's Quest where, he's actually trying to do reviews of games and engage them, it's fantastic. Thank you. God, wonderful. Board games do have reviews that people care about. But I think that there's something about Kickstarter's power in separating buying from owning. So let's say you're walking around a farmer's market, right? And you see that there's like kettle corn and there's this sand painting thing and there's this thing over here. And one of the things you're doing, you're kind of running a program, I think, in your brain of, do I want to bring that home with me? Right? Like, so if I buy the kettle corn, I'm just going to eat it here and then I'm done. So do I want kettle corn or not? I do. Let's have kettle corn. Done. But the sand painting, I got to carry it. I got to take it in my car. I got to take it home. I got to find a place for it. So like there's all these barriers to entry that have to do not with buying, but with owning. And Kickstarter just takes a knife and just cuts that right in half. You can buy and not worry about owning. Like I bought this Gloomhaven game. Where's it going to go? Who knows? What does my spouse think of it? I don't care. Like those are future Mark's problems. Like I will deal with those things down the road, right? There was one moment I was in graduate school when we were doing a lot of these early projects, and the Reaper Miniatures project was one of the first. I think they raised like well over $1 million or something. They just had like this ridiculous pack of miniatures for like $100 or something. And I don't play games that use miniatures, but like it was such a great deal that like I literally had like my mouse over the button and Marissa had to be like, Mark, you do not play games with miniatures. What are you doing? And I'm like, but look at how good a deal it is. Like they look so cool. I wasn't thinking about what I was going to do with them. I don't even play games that use them, but like it just felt so good to buy it. And I was like, okay. And that's great. I still to this day don't have anything I would do with them, right? So I think that what happens a lot is that you're describing basically almost 2 different consumers, right? One of them is the one who invests in buying it. And people buy for all kinds of reasons. One of the big ones is brand loyalty. So they're going to buy Frosthaven regardless because they've had a great experience with Gloomhaven. They want to support the company. They're excited about more content, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm talking about me, right? And Gloomhaven then sits on my shelf and now I own it and I have to decide things like, well, who am I playing it with? What's our schedule for playing, right? And so the way I think about it is more, I think, a little bit in reverse of you. The default state for all games that exist in the world at all times, including the ones directly behind you, is to be unplayed. All games are not being played right now, with a small exception of those that are. And the question is not what's going to move you from the those that are category to the those that aren't category. It's the opposite. What is it that moves you to those that are being played right now? Wingspan's a great example. I think Wingspan is like, from a design perspective, it's like very solid, really cool. I don't know why, but I can get that game to my table so easily. Like I'll just bring it out and be like, you guys want to play Wingspan? And people who are like, have played it before are like, sure, yeah, okay. And people who have never played it before are like, what is this? Whereas I can think of 4 or 5 games that I think are better, like they are deeper, they're more interesting, they're more compelling, they're more fun even, that I cannot get to my table as easily. So when I'm owning Wingspan, what's more important? Like what's the more important element of that? So with Root, for example, I think the reason people like playing Root is, do you want to play D&D but with cute anthropomorphic animals? Like, yeah, I do. Listen, that is a thing I can get to the table, right? And if I say, you want to play Mexican drug lords? You're like, I don't know who I would play that with. Also, is that racist? I think it might be racist. Mark said it's okay, but like he's also kind of white passing. So is that okay? I have many thoughts. You know what? Let's just not. Like is like, you know, and so there's this thing I think where one of the challenges of game design is this understanding that the default state of all games is to not be played. Once you get that, once you really understand that no one is playing any games statistically, they're all just sitting on people's shelves, then you really have to ask yourself, what are you doing to get your game played? And I think the founders of Gloomhaven thing is a great example of like, what do Gloomhaven fans want? They want to embody a character at this particular distance.
Mm-hmm.
And that product did not do that. So when they got it and they looked at it, wouldn't matter if the reviews were bad, good, whatever, those people who were the majority of people who bought it probably disengaged from it.
Yeah.
Whereas
Right.
Waterdeep, right, at the time that it came out, was really impactful because sure, it used D&D IP and that was nice and it gave people like a hook to think about. But it was like a really, really solid like worker placement game, right? Like it's like at the time there were not a lot of those games. It did a really, really good job, and so like it fit the industry for that moment, and therefore it was played a lot, like statistically way more than all the other worker placement games people weren't playing.
Yep.
Right. And so like when I look at something like Masks, right, which is our teenage superhero game, all I can think about is my friend who said his brother messaged him, another game designer, and his brother messaged him and said, like, is there a game like can I play like Teen Titans or something? Like, is there a game that does that? And he's like, bro, like there are not a lot of times I'm going to say this, but here is exactly the game you want in exactly the form you want it. Like,
that's awesome.
Have fun, right?
Yeah.
Because people usually come and they're like, hey, could I play like, I want to play like Sin City. Is there a Sin City game? And then you were like, well, not really. Like that's not exactly, but here's like kind of an approximation. But like if you have a game that people keep coming to you and saying, is there a game where I get to play anthropomorphic animals having adventures?
Yeah.
Here's Root. Like there it is, just for you. And so I think that like this is such a hard part of the conversation because people mistake the buying. I got lots of people to buy my game with then I got lots of people to proactively own my game as an object of play.
Yeah.
And like, you don't get to decide.
Yeah.
I don't get to say, I'm just going to work really hard and people will love to play it. That's not,
But sometimes that can be leveraged in the marketing, right, Mark? So, for example, I know this Alien role-playing game that you've mentioned is coming up. I know my father-in-law would love that, even though he's not a gamer. But he would buy that just to sit on the shelf, and he'd probably take it out when he's drinking a cup of coffee, and he'll flick through it because he's like, "Oh, this is pretty," and he'll never play it. But I guarantee, if I got that as a gift, he would absolutely love it. So I think this is something we've seen in marketing different role-playing games. Especially around the Christmas time. Kind of emphasizing, hey, this is a great gift to give for someone. That that kind of shoots out a lot of these games, and I think a lot of people are buying role-playing games not necessarily to play, but to give as a gift to people who really love that world and would love to have it on their coffee table that they can kind of whip out and flick through when they're drinking their coffee.
Well, I think that also points to like the difference between licensed properties and original properties, right? Is that licensed properties, they have a much bigger initial audience, but then they have this circle that's kind of drawn around them of people who care about that thing. You're never going to escape that circle, really, right? It's like so rare. I mean, a good example actually for me is Mouse Guard. I wasn't really familiar with the Mouse Guard comics before I played the Mouse Guard role-playing game, and the Mouse Guard role-playing game is incredible. So now I'm a fan of the comics. But that's rare. Like most of the time, you're not going to come to Avatar, play a 10-session Avatar campaign, and be like, "This is a show." Like this is not going to happen, right? What you're going to say is, "I don't know that property. Let's play something I know." Right? I don't want to play that game. I want to play something I know. But if it's an original IP, right, and I show up and I say, "Here's Masks. It's a teen superhero game," and you're like, "Well, I watched Spider-Man: Homecoming. Is it like that?" And you're like, "Yeah, it's like that." Make your character. Right. And now that character is existing in this space of play that there's no requirement for. You don't have to know something about that world to be that character. That has a much stronger play drive, I think. And so the answer there is like you can have, especially I think, Sean, as we've worked together on things, we've seen that like the Avatar starter set, for example, does really well with parents and with people giving gifts because they're like, oh, yes, I watched this with my son. So I will give this to him and he will be happy. And there is no discussion of whether they play it or not play it. The whole goal of the product is already achieved when the kid unwraps it and sees that it's got Zuko on the cover. Like we're already done, right? We're already done. We already did a great job. Good job, everybody. Like we did it, right? But like as we develop a mix of licensed and original products, right? Urban Shadows, which is our game that comes out next month, is our next generation urban fantasy game. Like if you love urban fantasy, this is what modern game design looks like for urban fantasy. There's no license. This is your world, right? And the people who play Urban Shadows, we get more feedback on Urban Shadows than we do on Avatar. Like in terms of like literal rules feedback, I get more feedback out of an audience that's probably 1/10 the size because those people, almost every single one of them, want to play this game. They want to play it, right? Because they're coming in with an attitude of, this is an urban fantasy game. I love urban fantasy games. I've played a lot of them. I would like to play this one too, right? So you got to decide as a company, like, what's that mix for you of safe bets that have these limits and exciting investments that may never pay out.
Yeah. So now I know we're at the top of the hour almost, and I have one question that I really is like a burning question I'd love to ask. Um, what advice would you have for tabletop RPG creators that are taking a product of theirs to Kickstarter, um, assuming that you can't convince them not to? What advice?
Don't do this.
Like
No,
this is
no,
a
yeah, of
terrible
course, of
idea.
course. No, it's good. But there should be
So
more. I mean, I want
yeah,
to be very clear that, like, when I started in this industry, I was like, 1,000 flowers will bloom. There'll be all these publishers. It bums me out that there's not more publishers. So I'm on board with this. Yes,
yeah,
let's tell this poor, unfortunate soul that they should invest in this extremely challenging industry. Go.
yeah.
So like, you're asking me what would I tell them in
Yeah, like
general?
what advice would you give to help them to be successful? Really, I guess
Yeah,
is the
the core of it always and forever is going to be your game is not the product. That's it. That's the number one. If you do not understand that, if you think that the game itself is the product you are selling, then you are doomed to be stuck in a cycle of making great things nobody cares about. Right now, that's better than making shit nobody cares about. So I will. That's a positive, right? But like, until you reach the understanding that your game is the internal organs of the product that you are making, you are going to be constantly thwarted by a failure to connect with an audience that does not want to eat the internal organs of a thing. They want to participate with the thing itself. So, when I think about something like Masks, right, we didn't sit down and say, okay, well, what's Masks' game and what's Masks' pitch? We just got lucky that the game as conceived does X, Y, and Z, but the pitch of Teen Superheroes was kind of made for us by Teen Titans, Young Justice, Spider-Man, and we just said, it's like that. Like, let's do that, right? And it worked great. But then you turn around to something like Apillion, which is our game about baby dragons that live in a dragon-centric world, and we're like, cool, Marissa put all this work into making the baby dragon game really cool. The dragons like grow up over time. They have friendship. Like, literally, friendship is magic. You literally turn friendship chips into magic. It's great. People that play it, that like that kind of stuff, are just head over heels for it. And then we put it in a black and white 6x9 book that was unable to kind of communicate to people the magic and wonder of Dragonia.
yeah.
What were we doing? Like, how is the product for this game that's supposed to be kind of oriented towards kids and kind of oriented towards a sense of like wonder and magic in a 6x9 black and white book? There's massive disconnect, right? And so when we did Bluebeard's Bride, which is our game of feminine horror, where you explore a mansion and decide if your husband is a misunderstood man or an actual serial killer who murdered all his former wives. Spoiler, it's that one. It's the wives, right? Like that game, Marissa said, I want it to be an 8x8 book. I want it to be square. I want it to have gold leaf on the cover. I want to go hire an artist who's like a genuine, actual shows at galleries artist to make a cover that's so good people stop and stare at it. I want people to be bothered by this book so that when they read it and play it, there's a synergy. The product is this feminine horror product.
Yeah.
The game is this feminine horror game. I mean, the one big thing, if you ask me for a second piece of advice, I'd be like, you should hire Marissa Kelly in any sense that you can, because a lot of our Kickstarter projects, a lot of our product development are done by Marissa, and she's just not as excited to be on a podcast as I am, right? So,
Yeah.
but like her vision for that book is awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
And it was probably one of the first times where we so solidly said, here is the game, here is the product, here is how they interlock.
Yep.
And by the time we do Avatar, we're like, cool, yeah, the Avatar game is a thing, and we're going to make a great game that does these things. But the Avatar product, to your point, Sean, has to involve, say, like a big chapter on the world, so that somebody who doesn't ever play the game can sit and review the history of the Avatar verse in one concrete spot with a bunch of cool art. And I think that is like the core of Kickstarter, core of crowdfunding, is understanding that your game is not the product. The product includes the game, but it is not. It is not a one for one.
So the way that I guess that I would interpret what it is that you said, and correct me where I'm wrong, the game is like a vehicle that opens up a new world in the mind of the player. That immersion is the true kind of takeaway product at the end of the day.
The true experience is, well, actually, I would complicate that and say, for some portion of your customers, that will be the true experience.
Yeah.
For the vast majority, it will not. Vast majority, their true experience will be they get the book, right? They like, here's my copy of Mothership. got my copy of Mothership. I got it. It's very nice. I opened the box. I was very happy with it. I opened this box. I was happy with what was inside that box, and I put it on my shelf.
Yeah.
And for most people, that might be it. Now,
Mhm.
I then quickly organized a group of people to play Mothership because I finally got my Mothership box and I was super excited to play it for many reasons that we've talked about what makes it worth playing. But that can't be the majority of people. It can't even be
Mhm.
20% of people. That's
Yeah.
not how it's going to work, right? So you have to understand that there's like a big pie chart of all the people who bought from you. Some slice of that pie chart is people who have the true experience of playing it. And God, don't you want to make that a great experience? Like that,
Yeah.
isn't that why we do this? Is for that small group of people to have this incredible experience with your game? That should be the goal, right? But then we have to acknowledge that the
Mhm.
other 85% of people are having a different experience, an
Yeah.
experience of writing and reading and discussing and like everything else that comes with it, right? And so I just think that, like, I don't say that cynically. Like
Yeah.
I was cynical for a little while, like, well, why are we even doing this? Nobody plays the games. But it's an understanding, as Sean said really well. I think that, like, the act of getting the starter set out and getting the pieces out and enjoying seeing how it all fits together is its own beautiful moment, and that doesn't detract from the other beautiful moments. It's its own independent beautiful moment, and we need to understand that it's maybe a more common beautiful moment than, and I think that's true in all art forms. I think, the number of people who are reading Ulysses and then going to a book club and talking about it is a very small group of people. That doesn't mean you shouldn't write Ulysses. It just
Right.
means you should have an understanding of what your interest is in that. So the product is the product. It's the thing you are selling, all of the experiences that come with it, all of the messages that come with it, all of the promises that it has. And the game is what's inside the box. When they get the box and
Mhm.
open it and they see the thing itself, that's a different kind of test, but they can't do that before they buy it. So
Mhm.
how are you going to sell them on the game? Like, that's not a thing they can experience in full before they buy it.
Yep. Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been such an awesome time. Really appreciate you and all the time that you've given, all the knowledge that you've given. I'm excited to like re-listen and and just absorb more information. I hope everybody that's listening to this really appreciates the fact that you came in and joined us. Really really exciting discussion. So I guess before we go, tell us what you got going on and how people can support if they're interested in that.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing is, like, we have Urban Shadows coming out next month, and we've been working with you all on getting the word out about it. I mean, it's one of the things I'm most proud of. It's the second edition of our Urban Shadows game, that really brings like a new lens to urban fantasy and moves it away from kind of like thinking about it as noir and makes it about crime fiction, about like compelling, like, people in conflict in the city across different communities, and it has a lot of next generation tools for creating big moments of drama and action without you having to memorize like a lot of lore, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's the kind of selling point for Urban Shadows. It is probably one of the best things we've ever made, partially because we got to build on the good thing we already made. Like, it was great to be able to build on that and make it better, and the art and the way it looks and everything about it is just totally next level, largely because I think Marissa and Miguel, who are our art team, just did a really incredible job with it. So I think it's a big thing. It's coming out in stores next month. It's available for pre-order through our website. Like, it's a really great product for you to, if you've ever been interested in Powered by the Apocalypse, it's one of the best, I think, explanations of Powered by the Apocalypse, and it's a really active, engaging implementation of it. In addition to that, we're still doing the Fall in London Kickstarter. It's going to run through March 13th, and we're at $700,000 at the time of this recording, which is it's a really cool setting. Also, kind of a little urban fantasy, a little investigative horror, with a lot of ways that we are excited about people engaging with it, because Fall in London has never been able to be engaged with this way, right? So
Mhm.
in the Sea and the other games are video games. They're on rails. They have their things that they do. This is really you and your friends exploring the city in a completely different way. And we're really excited about the support from Fail Better, the publisher of Fall in London, because they've been an awesome partner for making stuff happen. And then finally, if you're an Avatar fan, we have been working with Beetle and Grimm's, the people who put together like really high quality D&D and Pathfinder materials, to do a deluxe box set of Avatar stuff,
Ooh.
which is set in the Roku era around a ship called the Unity. So it's like a travel log adventure, and they have like this big box with all kinds of cool stuff in it, including all the rules you need to play. You don't need to buy any other box. Like, this would have everything, and we're co-publishing that with them to create this incredible deluxe box, and that's going to go on Kickstarter later this spring. Like, we'll see exactly what days, but like, in March, April, May. And it's really cool. Like, I am really excited about this kind of stuff, that, like, scrolls and like badges and like maps and like all these things that they do so well. that we don't really do. I don't do a lot of like physical production of weird items, right? So it's a great pairing of like our expertise with Avatar and their production expertise is really coming together in a cool way. So that's kind of like my year. Those are the awesome things that we're doing this first half of the year, and then we have some cool announcements at Gen Con when we'll reveal what we're doing in 2026 and 2027.
Okay. Wow. Exciting. Well, you guys make sure to hit up their Gen Con booth when it happens. And till then, we're going to have Robot Richard send us on out. Thanks again, Mark, for being on the show.
Thanks a ton, brother.
All right.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.